startup capital, grants, or startup kits for those interested in being self-employed and running their own businesses. The YETP approach of skills enhancement, capacity building in entrepreneurship and business management, as well as access to finance, has been piloted and scaled up with 500 beneficiaries in Ajegunle, Lagos, and in Warri, Agbo, Ozoro, and Ibuzo in Delta State. The success recorded in the CVL YETP pilot projects has shown that skills enhancement through internship, apprenticeship, vocational skills training, job shadowing, and business mentoring is a key element for job creation and youth employment. Even with the ongoing success of this initiative, there is still much to be done. CVL continues to work with both local and international partners across multiple sectors to impact more lives and reduce poverty in Nigeria and Africa at large. Join us as we shape our world, one mind at a time.
Well, let me just get this out. Let's see. Okay, good afternoon. My apologies, we've been battling many technical challenges. Those who are around these parts know that the rains came down with a fury in the last 3 days or so. Amongst the places flooded in Victoria Island are the offices of the Center for Values in Leadership. And so we're trying to overcome some of the challenges of the flood. And so welcome. I am enormously pleased, very, very honored to be able to come to us again with the 25th in the series of conversations that we've been having on aspects of the policy history of our country. As I keep saying at the introduction of each of these sessions, it has been an enormously gratifying thing to go through different sectors of our economy, looking at the issues that challenge the formulation of policy, the outcomes that came, the possibilities of doing things differently. Primary goal of this series is to help us accumulate knowledge, to help us share this knowledge very broadly, especially to young people, so that we can avoid the mistakes of history. As George Santayana long said about those who do not know history, they are very, very likely to repeat its mistakes. So we're hoping that our country can avoid repeating the mistakes of the past by learning from them. Um, in my teaching as an academic in business management, one of my favorite subject areas is organizational learning. And what we find is that those who are capable of getting a return on experience travel much farther, faster than those who are not geared to get that return on experience. And so our hope is that in this series, we will be able to uh, get a lot of that out. We started uh, we started with the oil and gas sector a couple of weeks ago. We started with some of the pioneers like Izoma Philip Asiodu, Dr. Imo Itsueli, and others, providing us some good insight into how the industry got going, the building of the National Oil Company. And we've continued through with several key players down that historic path. We have looked at the general environment. We've looked at gas specifically and what could have happened if we had traveled a different track on gas, what can still happen. And we had some of the critical players from gas with us on that conversation. And lately we've been looking at indigenous participation in the oil and gas sector. Part of what I am hoping that we can do today in getting some of the players in conversation is to tell us a little bit about, get them to tell us a little bit about the challenges they faced and how we should open the track for a new generation of entrepreneurs that are coming. Interestingly, I was in conversation earlier this week with Austin Oniwo, who was group managing director years ago. He was supposed to join us today. Unfortunately, he's living a couple of time zones away and would just be going into church about this time. But that presents us something else that we'll try to balance. But he was particularly keen on trying to get us to focus more on the future, in spite of whatever errors have taken place in the past. The future is really our focus, but to be able to take on the challenging issues of energy transition, the kind of scenario planning that we need to build to engage that energy transition, we have to understand what we did previously and what we learned from the things that we did previously so that we can engage that future more intelligently. So I have the good fortune of having with us here some of the entrepreneurs of the process and some of the managers from the public side. We have one of those who became lead policy thinkers, if you will, in the industry, Chief Mike Olorunfemi, who was at OPEC and was in the NMPC in just about all areas. We have the entrepreneurs like the Kola Karim, we have Kasmir Marapokwa, we have a number of them. We'll just talk through as we go. Again, 3 days ago, I was with Simbi Wabote in Benin, and we want to engage in a special way with the more recent successes of the Nigerian Content Initiative, which he shared very broadly. But I think that should be purpose specific for perhaps the next session before we go into downstream oil and gas, which we had advertised that was going to come up soon, because we want to exhaust the upstream play and how indigenous entrepreneurs enter that path. So let me begin nitty-gritty of venturing here. Maybe I should turn to Kola, are you there?
Prof, good afternoon, Prof.
Good afternoon.
How are you? I am here.
Fantastic to have you. In many ways, you represent that grit of the entrepreneur. First of all, how did oil and gas enter your horizon, and what were the challenges you had engaging that sector? As we are not as indigenous as you look, but you know, but an indigenous player.
Oh dear.
How did you engage? What were the challenges going forward?
Thank you very much, Prof. And to the Center for Values and Leadership, I think I'd say a big thank you. What you're doing is keeping the information and the conversation going, and making sure a lot of people are gaining some knowledge and value from the little experiences we have. And I love what you've done with this series, especially the oil and gas. One, the last interviews that was done was, the likes of the greats, Chief Ashiodu, Dr. Swaley. These are the founders and the pioneers of Nigerians in the oil and gas sector. And if you look at the evolvement of how this industry has evolved itself, the likes of Chief Asiodu were the people there in the beginning, in the real energy creation of this industry, from formation of the National Oil Company. And now it's very interesting. Now we're discussing, we're at the tail end of where the PIB goes into the evolution of the new creation of what is going to be seen as the future of the national oil companies. But be that as it may, the true position is most of us who came into the oil and gas sector, most especially the upstream, came in an opportunistic fashion. And why I say that is very simple. If you look early 2000s, the advent of democracy in 1999, then the wave of the bid round, but more importantly, the game changer was the marginal field round in 2003. That itself created the interest for Nigerian participation, true Nigerian participation in the oil and gas sector. And that brought a lot of people like us gaining interest in trying to see how this industry itself is evolving. But fast forward to that, again, the push from government, and this is very important, the push from government of localization, the local content bill became a bigger push, and it became a stumbling block for the international oil companies who are the major operators in Nigeria, having to involve Nigerians in the oil and gas sector. That again created another wave of interest of service providers who wanted to learn, who have worked for the international companies, who wanted to localize their knowledge by operating and becoming entrepreneurs. So another wave of entrepreneurs came into play. Fast forward to 2010, the biggest game changer was the international oil companies with the Niger Delta crisis in the early 2000s that moved on to 2007, 2008, where President Yaradua came in and tried to get a resolve with the local communities. And that's where we saw the signing of the agreement with MEND and the likes of them in the Niger, the restiveness in the Delta. That again pushed the international oil companies to wanting to start selling assets that are being operated onshore Nigeria. And the best opportunity was the best people to sell those assets to will be the Nigerians. And this is where we took the opportunity in 2010, 2011, got into the fray in trying to acquire these assets. So this is the short version evolution of where this industry started and where people like ourselves kicked in to the EMP upstream sector, and more importantly, in trying to operate. We completed our transaction in 2012. The asset we completed in 2011, but the asset was handed over to us. That's the OML 30 field was handed to us in 20. So we took over the operatorship with NPDC and NPC, and there started our world in actual operations in the oil and gas space. Today, OML 30 is one of the largest onshore fields sub-Saharan Africa. We sit on 1.2 billion barrels of oil, actual oil reserves. We also have 2.5 TCF of gas in place on this field. So this, in the global standards of oil and gas fields, this is one of the most phenomenal assets. Also coming into this acquisition is the Transforkados Pipeline, which is a 98-kilometer pipeline that goes from the beginning of the asset and cuts across the delta, Western Delta, onto the Forcados terminal, where we export crude. Now, OML 30 acquisition with the Transforkados Pipeline also helps the evacuation of all the other Western Delta producers who also produce into the Transforkados Pipeline to evacuate their crude into Forcados terminal. So it tells you the critical path we're playing in the Western Delta, especially because of the ownership of not only OML 30, which is the largest field and footprint there, but the Transforkados Pipeline, which acts as the evacuation point for 9 other oil producers in the Western Delta. What are the problems? It's not been all rosy. Right. The biggest problem we have faced over time has been the local communities. And that is a very, very important thing. Look, with any government's promotion of local participation in the oil and gas sector, one major issue that jumps out at you is how do we integrate the local communities with the performances and the successes or failures, because they are a major determinant to the future of our business. So that is one critical area. We have been able to ride through this. It's been rough sometimes, but it's always with involvement of local community, the local governments, the state governments, and also partnership with NMPC and the federal government. All this has to work in tandem.
How much do you think the current state of the PIB helps that conversation?
That's a very good question, Professor Tommy. I think the PIB is going to be a game changer. It's going to be a game changer. Why? Because that 3% or 5%, whatever the finite figure will be, of the host community interest is a game changer. Because it's pronounced now, there's no chief, there's no big man in the community that's going to be the one that's going to sit on it. It's the host community, and if the host com is formed properly, the youths, the women, and all stakeholders in communities can ask questions. And that will make them and put everyone on the table and around the table that we're all participating in the actual production of oil and gas from our communities. That is a game changer.
Lovely. Just before I leave you, I'll return later, but just before I leave you, in the last conversation we had, Dr. Fatanon, Lai Fatanon, made a point about the fact that part of the challenges were that it became an all-comers game for indigenous players rather than the terrain of professionals where, for example, you had a pharmacist, you have a pharmacist going into pharmaceutical enterprise, has been certified as a pharmacist before he can have a pharmacy, and you have, and so on, professionals. Of course, there was a different opinion about entrepreneurship and how you don't necessarily have to be a chemical engineer, but have entrepreneurial instincts and organize yourselves well and get the appropriate professionals. When you stand on this, what do you think about this? Is there a problem of quackery because it's an all-commerce game? Do you think that professionalizing the business in terms of, training and certification matters?
Look, Prof, that is a wonderful question. And Professor Dr. Fatono, I know very, very well. He's a consummate professional, one of the first leading lights who has come via, the system. And when I say the system, the indigenous national oil company itself, NNPC, and coming to the private sector. But look, what is important is this. If you look at the advent of any business, entrepreneurs are the leading lights of it, not necessarily professionally certified people in that industry. Entrepreneurs, the guy who's the risk taker. I am not a chemical engineer. I've got a management degree and a master's in law. So you can understand that, but we've taken opportunities and advantages that Nigeria has thrown to us, at least the local country companies that could raise capital, that's got the right connections and wherewithal to being able to raise the required capital, but more importantly, be in the market to employ the right certified professionals to work for you, with you, to actually actualize this value proposition in this asset you're buying. That's very important. I'm not sure quackery is the right word. Yes, there is in every industry that is new. In every industry that is new, you always will have the good, the bad, moving with the ugly. But the true position is water will find its level like it is in the oil industry. One, if you look at it today, the global oil companies wants to sell more assets, but how many people could raise capital, or how many people can international capital follow to acquire these assets? That's the question mark. So the wheat will sort itself out with time, but the true position is quackery should not be the word. The reality is professionalism in the sector and professionals working in the sector is more important, because oil and gas is a very dangerous business. You're talking rotating equipment, rotating machinery in a combustible environment. So it's important that HSE and global standards at all times should be maintained, either global or local company. You must operate on standard international positions. So this is the baseline opportunities that everyone working together in trying to actualize global standards in Nigeria.
Okay, fantastic. We'll rotate back to you, and I'll go to Kasmer Madafufa, who has been very active and entrepreneur in this sector for years. Sorry, Kasper, I just wanted to come to you to look at this from a broader perspective of indigenous participation, not necessarily just in an EMP company, but in terms of the supply, the pipeline business, and all of that. How easy has it been to play in this territory?
Okay, good afternoon. Happy Sunday, everybody. Professor Papat, you've been playing a very, what I call social responsibility function for all industries. And we commend you very, very, very much. When I saw the list and saw names like Dr. Swelly, and then Brother Kola Karim that I just spoke, so I felt being in very great company. Okay, I'll speak to you as an unknown economist, not like unknown soldier, but an unknown economist.
I was going to say that, this is times for unknown whether soldiers, economists, oilmen, unknown people.
Who dabbled into the oil sector and then trying to reconstruct everything. Now, but I want to the economic and significance of the what you call the indigenous oil and gas sector, and to let you know that without the sector, domiciliary funding, that the banking system of Nigeria is than 1/4 of the size of what it is, you know, and because now the whole service delivery cycle is monetized, and the money can be kept at home or at least operate at home. Dollars reside in New York, but electronically you can move it. You move it from here, you know. So the point there is that the regulatory authorities have to be careful when they are dealing with domiciliary account, because it has major significance in the scheme of things, both for the service company and for the independent oil companies, you know, the local independents. Now, so I don't know how much I give a conceptual view of how to understand the interaction of the oil and gas sector, especially the service and independent sector, right, with the employment and credit capacity, you know, and what are the challenges and how to enlarge it, how to broaden the market, you know. A local service company is nothing if it cannot employ people, Nigerians, and if it doesn't invest locally in facilities and infrastructure, you know. In Nigeria, everybody is their own government, so you provide your generators, you provide your own warehouses, you provide everything. Sometimes you do your own roads, you know. And in terms of encouraging companies, such should be the parameters to look that people are employing Nigerians, training Nigerians, and getting them, you know, to have their own families and income base. You know, it's very important, you know. So we at TCON, Niger Blossom Drilling, we've been around for almost 30 years, you know. It's very strange, you know. And so we are in the drilling part of the business, drilling workover part of the business. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the industry as a whole and how to grow it and how to enlarge it. And how to measure the performance of that segment. You know, first of all, we should make a distinction between the revenue from oil production and the costs involved with oil production. So the service sector operates on the cost side. That's where the activity happens. You know, so in Nigeria, the revenue side, apart from the Nigerian independence like Kola now, the revenue goes to the government. And even the independents pay a lot of revenues to the government. So the efficiency of that spending on the revenue side is supposed to create the social infrastructure, health, education, and roads, and things like that. So the efficiency of that spending is what we politically have to improve on. But on the cost side of it, that's the cost of production, the cost of producing that stuff is basically, you can look at it as a fraction is overhead of the oil company. So if you look at the Shell oil company, ExxonMobil, the overhead and the payment to and vendors. Okay, local content is to flip the distribution of, that's the allocation of the cost side of the business, which is where the local companies operate on the service side, and some of the multinationals also. So there's a productivity in services, because normally the oil companies have long-term requirements so that the companies that service them also are there for the long term. But of course, the contracting formula determines on who does what in that process, you know? So the other point to be mentioned is that internationally, there's no distinction between, if I'm servicing Chevron upstream, for instance, and if I'm servicing refineries, you know, the seriousness of the limitations of industry is so narrow, because the focus is on the oil companies, the upstream, you know, because the downstream or midstream, the control has been with the governments in the last several years, you know, so that the credit rating of that operation is rather very low. The allocation of projects and the payment system is also, you know, you cannot put your head there, you know. So if we can increase the credit standing of the downstream and the midstream, then the people servicing those people are equally part of the service industry. So that will grow the market by a factor of 2 or 3. And so that's why we're happy with the launching of the Dangote projects, the refineries, the petrochemicals. I know that the petrochemical company already here in Dorama, although the scale is fairly small, but they have had some very good contribution, you know. So what you don't understand that the refinery here would ultimately generate a lot of service support, you know, both foreign and domestic, because to run that infrastructure, you know, and if their contracting strategy is correct, is competitive, and the payment system is good, you know, like in terms of quality, then that will create a whole set of new industries, service industries to support the operation. Very, very critical. You know, if the credit quality is not good, then everybody runs away. And then the allocation of the jobs becomes really very uninteresting, at least to people who are professional in their ways. But we trust that it should be competitive, so that what we call the service sector now will practically grow very, very much, you know, in the short run. Once all these things, because to service the infrastructure, the distribution of those stuff, and if the issuer, that's the credit, issue of the papers, the contracts to the vendors is from a reputable unit, then it becomes, they get support from the service industry. You know, if you say you
I can get you to reflect some more while you're on that track on practice from elsewhere in the world. You know, a good part of public infrastructure in a country like Australia were actually created originally by the mining companies, railroads and all of that to open up the country. And systems are worked out where, as these then become public infrastructure, if you will, those mining companies get the credit appropriate to that. Maybe that's the kind of direction we're moving with Dangote doing roads and stuff like that. The inefficiencies that we see in government resources, projects, could that not have transformed? We'd like to see roads, railroads, XYZ, going through all of these places where you are exploring and you get X kind of credit for it. Would you not have been a more efficient way than paying these taxes and then waiting for government to do those roads? East-West Road, we've spent 1,000 years trying to build. If Shell had been told, build us this road and you get tax credit for it, and it becomes public infrastructure, could that have been a more intelligent way to do it, like the Australians have done, for example?
Yeah, it's a very, very, very fundamental and powerful question, And I always thought, even from education, I rather ask Shell, Total, please adopt a university, please adopt a hospital, and you have experience in project management, you manage this, your bills to be audited, and you present this in lieu of tax as a tax credit. Even this community development, like NDDC, with all due respect, the project management capacity of those entities are limited. It would have been better to partner with the big oil companies who are experts in project management, to put the contracting quality and the execution plan in at the level that they will operate, while the funding is channeled, however it's going to be channeled. They can help them as a matter of, now the government, on the education, if you talk to the government, okay, can I adopt a school like what Dangote is doing now on the roads, It can be, you can use it as a way to build up both the social infrastructure and the hard infrastructure by getting organized institutions, very established institutions, experience to handle maybe just at cost some of those project management and delivery responsibilities in all sectors, and it will be better than the government say, okay, give me the money, I'll spend it for you, okay? And we know that even in the US, they said that government expenditure goes through a leaky bucket. So there are a lot of leakages and wastes in that process, and also a lot of delays, So if you can increase the efficiency of the government spending, and so instead of collecting the taxes and then coming back to the market, you can ask the institutional taxpayer to do certain things. Even in the banking sector here, like in Lagos here, some of the roads have been done by people like Zenith and Co. on their roads. I don't know the deal with the state government, how you get your money back, but those things can be done very efficiently, but it has to be platform, it has to be planned, it has to be very, very transparent so that nobody will say that anybody is doing anybody any favors. Yeah. Okay, so the Nigerian the service industry, as I was saying, that the interaction with the banking system, the health of the banking system, even on the EMP side, there's a lot of synergy. So, and the issue of the dollar supply and the dollar flow, there's nothing special about the dollar. It's just a currency, We cannot be worshiping on the altar of US dollars. It's just a means of payment, For currency to flow, it has to be able to come in and go out. If it cannot go out, it will not come in. So everybody has to be careful how they handle things like, on the regulatory side of things, how they handle domiciliary accounts. Lately, the banks have introduced a lot of restriction, documentation, and so it's very, very sticky, And so people are recalculating their position, as to what really they have to do. That shouldn't happen, because without the domiciliary system, the banks here, if the Zenith, the Assets, the GTBs, these are now Pan-African banks. They're buying banks all over the place based on the capital generated locally. They can bank Olme 30, they can bank a lot of these places. So that you can internalize the money flow and then use it. So they have, the leverage, they can leverage on those funds, both domestically and with their international bank affiliates. So it's very, very important to keep things very clean, and not to play around with certain things there, because the private sector, the individual player, everybody's working to make a living, to build capital and stuff. So there's a lot of calculations. So the behaviors will change if certain things change, and we want to change them in the right direction for the economy, to boost employment, to do all of that, not to really scare people away, because it's a very fragile system.
Okay, let me return to Kola Karim for a minute to provide a sense for the value chain. Part of the approach to development that I try to encourage is to take factor endowments that we have. Clearly, the hydrocarbons endowment is a major one. And to then try and get a focus with appropriate industrial policy around that endowment, and then unrolling its value chain, educating Nigerians to be able to have the skills, build capacity at different levels of that value chain. And entrepreneurially, people engage in different parts of the value chain, become globally competitive, and be able to live in. Now we know that given many trends, amongst them the whole business of energy transition, the fact that the kinds of skills that multinationals tend to play in is such that they are systematically leaving this economy in the oil and gas area, systematically reducing their activity. It doesn't mean Nigeria is out of it. It means that increasingly there will be indigenous play. Now, for a lot of young people who will be listening to this conversation and will develop an interest in the oil and gas sector, what's the nature of the value chain? Kasper talked about banking. People don't realize that a very critical part of this whole thing is financing it, and the skills that's involved in financing this area, which we have not developed enough, in my view. It involves, of course, the pipelines, those who are doing that. Some Nigerians are playing at that. Some of them have complained in part of the research that we've done coming up here that they've invested significant monies to develop capacity, and most of that money has literally lying idle and stuff. But just talk us through the oil and gas value chain and where there are opportunities for a whole generation of Nigerian entrepreneurs and skilled people today.
Thank you very much, Professor Utomi. And Kasmir, my dear brother, thank you. Kasmir's company has been one of those trailblazers as a service provider in the sector. And you know, buttressing the point he was talking about that unlocking that value chain, a typical example I'm going to give you is if you look at that when he was talking about project management and getting the right competent skill set to delivering the projects. It's critical. Nigeria has just gone through an amazing, I call it the Eureka moment, but a lot of people seem to miss it. And that is what's just happened in the railways. Now, if you look at what's happening in the railway sector, it's taken over 100 years. Nigeria is just delivering the first wave of railway development. And that is a phenomenal moment because the minute unlocking the railways takes shape, like we're seeing on the Lagos-Ibadan today, you can then imagine how that is going to actually reduce the wear and tear on the Nigerian roads. So this competent position is taking root, one, because the effective project management, and imagine the total development of railway in Nigeria at about, let's say, 6,000 kilometers of future development that is actually going to take shape. So imagine the amount of Nigerian competent project managers that will be rolled out. Imagine the amount of competent Nigerian operators, service providers in that sector. So I think, going back to the oil and gas sector, looking at the opportunities in the oil and gas sector, it's the same thing, but this time we should not miss it as Nigerian and budding entrepreneurs in Nigeria and as these opportunities unravel. And let me go to the oil and gas sector. If you look at the value chain, first, decarbonization is going to change the landscape of operations in oil and gas sector in Nigeria. As you can see, you've seen the announcement from the likes of Exxon, with the activist investors forcing their way onto their board, trying to make them radically change their focus and footprint. You've seen the announcement from Ben Van Beurden, the global CEO of Shell, and Nigeria, as an example, is one of those where they're going to be selling assets. We've seen the likes of Chevron. Now, what is going to happen is this. The critical transformation of opportunities from Nigerians and the younger generation is, one, looking at provisions of services, laundry services. Let's look at the easy pickings. I call them the easy pickings. Housekeeping and laundry services. You do not need to be a space scientist to provide those kind of services. We just need to organize ourselves into small SME businesses that can provide those businesses up to the right standards that's required for the industry. Two, catering services. Any oil and gas operation, people need to eat. So someone needs to provide the catering for this. Those are the easy over-the-table opportunities. Then let's move it upscale a bit. Tool pushers, people handing tools over to the service providers in the facilities, right? They're called tool pushers, providing this type of people that are trained, and you don't need, again, rocket scientists or degree holders. These are definitely, City and Guilds type people that needs to be certified. So technical education, certification around technical education is very important for the Nigerians to provide support services into this sector. And there's no major creativity other than simplistic provisions, okay? How much do you need to provide to services to companies? Those are easy pickings. Then the next step up is people like fitters, welders, right? So technical education, creativity around technical education, because we need welders nonstop. Pipelines are wear and tear on pipelines. They need to weld them. And this services needs continuous support. Let me give you a map. Majority of the oil and gas assets that's been sold by the international oil companies, be it to local companies, are operating on what I call run and maintain. These facilities and fields, I'll give you an example. OML 30, when we took over in 2012, we had on the fields Clark compressors that were installed in 1974. Now, how has Shell been able to keep these Clark compressors running? Run and maintain only, but these equipments have a field life. So we now, having taken over these assets, we're having to buy latent modern compressors on these assets. So we are needing to train Nigerians to support this. Here is an opportunity. Let's go forward. If you look at the pipeline as an example, the Transforkados Pipeline, that is the main export line from the Western Delta. So all the oil in the Western Delta going to Forcados Terminal, majority of it passes through the Transforkados Pipeline. But Transforkados Pipeline was commissioned in 1969. So that pipeline is 50 years old. So imagine the life cycle of that pipeline. Again, it shows the opportunities. So welders, fitters are working on this. Equipment operators, compressor operators. Again, these are simple soft skills that could be learned, that could be certified, that could be created in the local communities. These are jobs that are there. So if we look from the bottom to the top chain of the oil and gas sector, there's an amazing opportunity for the communities and for our people, for budding entrepreneurs, to build small and medium-sized businesses to provide that support. It's not only, you see, the likes of Kashmir, for his business, he is a mid to large size service company, will need these smaller service providers to provide support services for him, for his drilling and operating services. So when I look at the oil and gas value chain, there's an amazing opportunity waiting to happen right across Nigeria, not only in the oil and gas sector, but in several sectors like the railway sector. Because Nigerians can now create service SME type companies that will be providing support, learning global standards and proper standards that will be energizing that industry and servicing the industry and the sector. Another big area that is huge is training. Training is required. Training, one good thing Nigeria has compared to a lot of other oil producing countries, Nigeria has been producing oil for almost 60 years. Now, if over 60 years, it tells me we're now moving into the second generation Nigerian support service people. So if you look at people like Dr. Lai Fatono, who's just recently retired, they are the second wave. We're now moving into the third wave. And that third wave is where the young Nigerian graduate needs to tap into, either as an employee or as an entrepreneur, in building their bases to providing small to medium services to the sector. One thing is radically happening in the world. Decarbonization is a given. But Nigeria's potentials is also huge around its gas reserves, more so if the oil consumption of the world is being shifted because of decarbonization. And why I say this is this: we need to start looking at the next wave of entrepreneurs in Nigeria, radically not only sitting around oil, but also looking at what the gas and the gas value chain has to add to the development of this country and also this continent. A typical example today is this: Nigeria is sitting on over 200 TCF of gas. I call it accidental gas. So what that tells me, if Qatar is the largest gas producer today, commercial gas, as in LNG, and all they have is just over 500 TCF of gas that they went to look for. Nigeria has 200 accidental gas find. It tells me Nigeria is more of a gas country than an oil country. So what that tells me is the opportunity in the gas value chain could be infinitum not only looking at LNG, looking at LPG, looking at all CNG in the entire gas value chain will be a massive game changer for Nigeria. Again, here lies the opportunity. So what I'm saying is the potentials for the young and budding entrepreneurs in Nigeria is looking at the entire energy value chain, not only oil, but gas value chain, in trying to see which part of this could I get trained and could I put and mobilize to develop to be a player. One key area, Prof, is this, right? All what we said and we're saying is good. But if the Nigerian banking sector is not going to be available to provide the required financing, then we are not going anywhere. So the true position is this. Government also, and I see them doing it with NDB, they've got the funding put together, trying to support some business in the local content sector. But this business of oil and gas is a global business of global standards. It's not only a local focused business alone. So the true position we need to look at ways in attracting international mobilization of capital that will help in energizing and developing that whole value chain. It's a critical moment for Nigeria. It's a critical moment for the oil and gas sector. And more so, it's a critical moment and global rethink of decarbonization and what that's doing to banks being able to fund oil, but they can't fund gas because it's a cleaner form of energy. So this is just the rethink and the shaping of what I want to my put into the group.
Again, let me talk. I know some of our participants are struggling to connect. Achipolon Femi has been going back and forth and not being able to connect. But returning to Kashmir, again, I typically talk about scoop economies. The skills that you develop trying to do one thing are generally transferable to producing many other things. If you wanted to bring in players who are already doing things into the oil and gas space, given this whole thing about scope economies that you can expand from your base, what you currently know and do, into more things. We are sure we be going to look for entrepreneurs. And I'm going to, in a second, I know Dr. Ihedu, who is a pioneer in this area, is in with us. I'm going to probably come to him in a few minutes to ask some questions related to some of these. What in your experience should we be doing, and where should we be going to bring in people who already have some base skills that can be expanded? And I gave you a context for why I'm saying this. Part of the way that South Korea traveled, when they determined from perspective planning back in the 60s that there were certain value chains that they wanted to dominate, play a critical role in. One of them, of course, was shipping. So what they basically did was look for young engineers who were working in marine areas, and basically said to them, what would you think you need to be part of leading shipbuilding in the world 30 years from now? What would you need? They sat down with government officials, including the president at that time, really, in the person of President Park. And he would have bankers sitting there. He would have steel producers sitting there, all these people. Okay, we want to become dominant shipbuilders in the world 30 years from now. These young marine engineers working for that small marine operation, they say that they would like to be the big players in this territory. So we want them to tell us now what they think they need to dominate shipbuilding 30 years. And then the young engineers will say, oh, if we had steel at no more than this kind of value, then they will turn to the steel producers. What will it take for us to get this kind of steel or this quality of this? The steel players will give their, speed of this. Oh, we need no more than 1% interest rate of borrowing and blah, blah, blah. And the bankers sitting there, what will it take to give these people money at 1% interest? Oh, government will have to deposit 49, whatever it is. And then we get a sense for a commitment. And industrial policy is developed around that. If it is just to protect that sector from foreign, whatever, for just a period, if it is to ensure that they have access to capital. I mean, because you were saying earlier about financing in oil and gas, the challenges that's there. Look, there's a lot of shortage of capital here, but there's a soft use of capital. There's too much capital in the world. One of the benefits of globalization has been that there is more capital available in the world today than at any time in human history. The point is that it's in a few hands. And the question is, we need to develop the skills for accessing those few hands and convincing them that this is where to bring the money. And our bankers can play in partnership with those people to be able to. So, given this kind of context, what should we be doing on these things in terms of scope economies? Who should be attracted into oil and gas and motivating to achieve these kinds of objectives?
Is there somebody to take the question?
Sorry?
No, I was wondering if there's if you're directing your inquiry.
Yes,
to
to you.
somebody.
Yes, to you.
To myself?
Yes.
Okay. So now we trust
Sorry, Prof. I was going to say to Kashmir, the economist.
unknown economist. Okay, that I was okay. I will get to that point, but His Royal Majesty, my good brother here, mentioned something very, very important. That the assets now being transferred to the local companies or the fields, they have legacy issues, the risk of which was not really properly analyzed, And similarly, in the marginal field process, okay, there might be certain risk, which a small operator will now take over without knowing really what to do, because now you have the chance of re-entering an old well. So it's a sudden death, either you make it or you don't make it, So most of these wells may have been abandoned by the oil companies because there are certain, okay, there's always surface risk all over the place, but the subsurface risk, the Nigerian oil flows very naturally, but some wells might be under balance or high pressure or high temperature. And it's not for a small operator to suddenly find himself in that kind of situation. And this risk may not be known neither to DPR nor to the bidder, So what Kola was saying about the infrastructure of these other fields that really the oil companies have not invested in for ages, you know. They milked the easy stuff and then sold them. And then the new operator is trying to they are not on their own, they have to deal with. So because of that risk that they're facing, it would have been easier if they can, the government can always get their money through royalties.
Yes, but that's a part of the conversation that needs to be had. The approach that we take
this
to
company run. So
I think.
Yeah, I think we have internet connectivity challenges here.
Yeah.
Let me turn while we're trying to get Kasme to you know, check his local connection to see if it can improve. I understand that Chief Olorunfemi has actually been with us, and I'd appreciate his reflecting on how policy has evolved coming back from OPEC and the passion of trying to get indigenous participation in the oil and gas sector, from observing what was going on in other OPEC member countries, in Mexico, in Brazil, Malaysia, and others. What were the obstacles that we encountered from the policy perspective to becoming as strong players as the local oil entrepreneurs became in those other economies? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello?
Okay, lovely. Yes. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Olorunfemi Michael. I must say that really I appreciate my being with you today. This is my first time of seeing what Professor Patel told me is doing. And I want to congratulate all of you. I must say that really I'm in the area of policy, not really as an entrepreneur. But the point was that...
Indeed, Chief, that's the perspective we want you to come at it from. How policy evolved. Because the conversation is between entrepreneurs, policymakers, and even civil society to see how we can build up the sector.
Yeah, what I can say is that really, when I came back from OPEC my first going to OPEC was 73, and I came back in 77. And after 4 years there, I was able to see really what other countries were doing. And as a matter of fact, we came to find out that really we were not taking any advantage of our own gas. We were flaring gas all the time. But then we found that really other people were already, they understood what it was, especially the countries like Algeria, countries like Indonesia, they were already
Okay,
trying to.
Are you watching the?
Are you with me?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, was my? I think my stuff was muted.
Please, we can all unmute. Unmute. Sorry. Those of us except Chief Lauren Femi who's speaking. Yes, go ahead, please, Chief.
Yeah. So what it means was that really we saw these countries already taking advantage of getting value from their gas. And at that time, we were still flaring gas. So it became necessary for us now to look into that. And then to again tell the oil companies that really they should no longer be flaring gas. And so we had to now devise policies to make them now to start not flaring gas. And that was really the first problem we had, because they were looking at it from the point of investment that they needed to add. And we told them, really, look, we could no longer be flaring gas because some people were already, realizing a lot of revenue from it. And so the first thing we did here was to tell them that really no more gas flaring. And this took a long time for us to get it into, a sort of a deal for all companies to know that really the flaring of gas has become now something that they will be penalized. And then we're looking at the appropriate penalty that really they will be paying. At first, the type of thing that really did was that really they were paying more or less little, almost nothing for it. But later on, we increased this amount, and then they started now to be sure that really they could not be making use of, of gas. This was the beginning of the gas utilization in Nigeria. It was because really we saw other people that they were already, adding value to their hydrocarbons, not only through, oil, but again in terms of associated gas. And so, in fact, it took a long time before people now began to look for, for gas, by itself, because really it took a long time before we knew that really Nigeria was really not, that we were richer in gas than oil. And this is exactly really what led to all the policies that really we have since adopted in the oil and gas industry. Are you with me? Hello?
Now, when you began in the early days in NMPC to try and encourage indigenous participation, how much attention was paid to hand-holding, if you will, indigenous entrepreneurs entering the territory? I mean, I just told the story of how South Korea tried to do it with shipping. And what do you think we should be doing looking at the future to bring in more local entrepreneurs to play in this territory? Given
Prof, I'm
your
not hearing you.
broad experience.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I did.
Did you manage to hear me?
Yeah, I cannot hear you.
Okay, yeah, I was saying that it would be beneficial to thinking if we could get a sense for why there was more difficulty hand-holding indigenous entrepreneurs in those early days to get them to be active players compared to, say, how some of those countries you talked about watching from OPEC and how much progress they were making. In effect, what really was different? What did we do differently that made us get less success? And what can we do to accelerate success rate of indigenous players in the sector?
Yeah, I must say that really when you take a country like Algeria, might be because they didn't have as much oil as they had gas. So they had to emphasize the development of gas in their country. The same thing with Indonesia. Indonesia too has very limited, oil, and therefore they were looking at gas as something that really they could, tap on and develop. So, whereas in our own case, we were a medium-sized oil reserve country, and therefore our background and in terms of what we have been doing really was oil. And so it took us a long time to begin to look at gas. And this was precisely ready because most of the gas we first had was associated gas. These were gas that really were coming along with the oil. And so you will see it again that really most of those people who develop gas, they saw that really they had more gas, which was not really associated gas. They were looking for gas for, by itself and for itself. Whereas in our own case, most of the gas which we were first looking at was associated gas. So what I'm just saying here is that really the policy here changed a little bit because we were depending upon the oil. And then we were seeing the oil, the associated gas as something that really we didn't need or we didn't have to look at. Whereas those other countries had to look at gas because they didn't have as much oil as we have here. So what I'm just saying is that really it took some time. But right now, it is, we all now know that really that because of the question of the carbon emission, people are now beginning to look at a cleaner form of fuel, and that is natural gas. So for indigenous people now to be interested in this, it takes some people like you and the type of thing you are doing right now to get people to become interested. You see, because people really will not take a risk in terms of what they don't know about. But as much as they begin now to know more about this, through this type of thing you are doing, people now become interested in it. That's what I can say. I can tell you, from the policy angle.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Let me turn to Dr. Ihetu. He has been with us through this series, and Dr. Ihetu has been Mr. Gas himself. But the angle that I would like to invite comments from him is related to, again, building up that value chain and who should we be hunting for to bring into this sector to play along the value chain. I gave in one of the previous conversations the example of how Egypt, literally a marginal player, more or less, became globally dominant in one skill, underwater painting. For example, I think somebody set up a school and all of that. Suddenly you're looking for somebody to do underwater painting. You head to Egypt to find a skilled person. You saw how Filipinos became the crew of the world for ocean-going vessels. And suddenly, most of the vessels going around the world are crewed by Filipinos. If we had to find a part of this value chain to try and become the dominant players in the world, especially since we're talking a lot of gas, and Nigeria is more like a gas country with associated crude oil. What areas would you be suggesting that we encourage entrepreneurship, encourage investment in training, so that people who come out of these processes would become really sought after all over the world, and obviously here too?
Good to participate again in your program. Yes, I would like to talk about gas, and I would also like to talk about transfer of technology, which in a way you have alluded to. And in this case, I would like to use NETCO as a case study. Let me go to gas. The important thing to know about gas is that gas must have a home before it can be sold. Unlike petroleum, crude oil or petroleum products, which you can sell anywhere in the international markets. I was very interested in what Kola Karim said about the term he used, accidental gas. I think that's so apt because we've never gone looking for gas. In fact, the only gas fields that are in operation now, I believe, are those feeding the NLNG plants, where just to make up the required volumes, the Soku fields were then exploited, and they were mainly non-associated gas fields. Otherwise, every other thing we've had is associated gas. And Mike was talking about penalties. Penalties did not work because if you don't have anything to do with your gas, you just had to flare it and pay whatever government was asking you to pay. But the important thing is that gas must have a home. That is why gas availability in the Western region, if I may call it that, all the way from Escravos to Lagos, was as a result of Egbe gas plant. If there was no Egbe gas plant, power plant, then there wouldn't have been that gas pipeline system. And today we are talking about AKK, that's Ajokuta, Kaduna, Kano pipeline system. There must be a need for this gas down there for it to be, for the gas pipeline to be viable or to have been, thought about in the first place. Now, if you're talking about indigenous participation in this area, then there must be proper system set up to be able for these indigenous companies to procure a market. I mean, assuming that they had somebody who needed gas in well, let's say Owerri. Now, there is no gas infrastructure lead in Owerri, apart from the fact that there are some gas fields in Imo State. Today, you have the Ano gas processing plant, which in fact is a joint venture between Seplat and Shell. And that gas is, again, going towards the west. So you must have somebody who needs the gas for the entrepreneur or for the investor to be able to buy gas and send it to the gas user. Because of the challenge in all of these processes, first you have to procure the gas from a gas producer because it may not be a gas producer. You have to buy that gas. You have to put infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure. You have to also negotiate a long-term sales agreement with the buyer. And these sales agreements, they are like 10 to 20 years duration. And they are usually in a system called take or pay. So it is not a joke. You bring the gas, the buyer must take. If he doesn't take, he pays penalty for not taking the gas. So I think for the indigenous small player, that can be a challenge. And that is why I think The major gas infrastructure we have seen has mainly been built by NNPC and the oil companies. Now you look at the NLNG plants or NLNG company and the success that they have achieved, and you can see the amount of money that went into that and the amount of effort. The gas story for Nigeria started in 1963. As far back as 1963, Shell had started talking about how they can put together an LNG plant. But this didn't happen because eventually the Civil War intervened. And of course, there was the North Sea gas in Europe that now became more interesting for the oil companies than Nigerian gas. Later on, post-war, Shell resumed interest in developing LNG in Nigeria. And as far back as 1976, the Bonny LNG company was formed. But of course, some of us know the story of that. By 1980-81, that company was liquidated for various reasons, financing, availability of finance for NNPC. Well, let me just stop there, but I wanted also to talk about NETCO. I can stop if you want.
Yeah, please go ahead on NETCO. Yeah.
On NETCO, well, let me again say I was in head of engineering in NNPC. When I came in 1985. By 86, I had this urge, I've always had it as a passion, that we must have some indigenous engineering capacity at home. So in 1986, I came up with a plan, which I sold to the then managing director, Areth Adams. And he gave me the mandate to come up with a plan. And my plan was, well, let's go to Brazil, see what Petrobras has done. Let's go to Japan, see what they have done. Go to India, see what they've done. Go to Indonesia. And we visited all these places with a team. When we came back, I think the one that impressed us most was Engineers India. Engineers India had been in joint venture with Bechtel. Bechtel is, of course, one of the largest engineering companies in the world, which is American. And they had a joint venture, but it didn't last. But it lasted long enough for the Indians to capture some of the systems and methods of Bechtel. And that's what we tried to do in NETCO. When I came back, produced a report, went through a bid process. By chance, we called in about 4 or 5 international engineering companies. In the end, we settled with Bechtel. It was a chance. It wasn't just because they were in India, but it just happened that it worked that way. So in the case of NETCO, what happened in India is exactly what happened there, because eventually Bechtel pulled out. But in the meantime, NETCO has achieved the systems and the methods of Bechtel. But what has happened here is that while I was promoting NETCO, even as head of engineering, because I was there when NETCO was incorporated as a subsidiary in 1986. In 1988, even at that time, we had problems in promoting NETCO among the NNPC refineries. They would rather do their own engineering and leave NETCO to sort themselves out. So it took a long time before NATCO was really accepted. But I'm happy to say that from what I hear, NATCO is now doing very well. And this has not been because of a national vision. It was almost like a departmental vision that has now come out to be, a major training facility for Nigerian engineers. And then, which leads me to your question about long term. You are talking about South Korea and the visions. Unfortunately, unless I'm mistaken, we have never had this kind of long-term vision in any of these areas. Everything has been almost by well, the vision of individual managers and well, maybe managing directors, and the lack of continuity in policy was also as a result of lack of continuity in the chief executives. As chief executives are brought in, well, everybody knows the average tenure of chief executives in NNPC, maybe 2-3 years, perhaps. So there was always, and not only the chief executives, but also even the ministers, the same kind of thing. So there was lack of continuity in vision, which South Korea, I'm sure, did not suffer. And that is what we need going forward. There has to be very clear paths. And we have mentioned the Nigerian Content Board. Yes, that's a good one. And that is the kind of thing that we should sustain, because that board has a clear mandate and knows where it is driving that indigenous companies, in what direction it is driving them. So I want to rest my case there. I was going to talk about.
Thank you so very much there, because it helps bring together some of the thinking I had in asking that question. In many ways, I've seen Nigerian engineers come out of NETCO and do significant consulting work. Dr. Ebilola Mao, who used to partner with me to do the Nigerian content programs at the Lagos Business School for years. She came out of NETCO. And part of my thinking is precisely that the way to grow the industry is to go and find those young engineers who went into the NETCOs of this world, built up skills, and support them to create ventures in the industry. In addition to what entrepreneurs like Kola Karim and co are doing, we take those kinds of people, which is my idea of what South Korea really did. There are quite enough of them. I mean, years ago, when Pepple was acting GGM at NAPIMS, I went to see him, and we had been trying to build up the question of knowledge management for NAPIMS, because as people were retiring and moving on, NAPIMS was big hole of knowledge. A system for capturing knowledge and keeping it in the organization was not there, and the conversations started as to how to take these talented people who had been trained by NNPC, even in refining, in the refineries around the world, to come and work with the setting up of the refineries, who had been trained in so many areas. And many of them were retiring, some of them early retirements, and were supposed to be consultants, but the country was not systematically deploying those talents to grow. It's good to know that today the Nigerian service companies that are moving into Uganda and all kinds of places, even exploration companies and all of that. And that's probably the track that we need to do to grow more of these entrepreneurs and these skilled people and find them and give them opportunity, not only in Nigeria, but as the whole continent grows its oil and gas sector. So this is really a critical part of the direction that our conversation will grow and how policy can help us here. Like I said, we're going to have a session with Simbi Wabote, and he will bring those that they have been supporting along onto that conversation. And we can explore a broad terrain of how to create multipliers of that kind of initiative rather than just a few that we can keep showcasing, but essentially really get many more players who can then play competitively. I mean, the whole idea of international domination of economic sectors by countries. Why do the Germans dominate luxury automobiles, for example, and all of that is because they build a lot of skills internally. Internal competition then gets externalized, and they dominate global value chains. So part of our hope is that we can do this in the oil and gas sector. So as a point where we ask for comments and questions from participants, so if anyone would like to raise a question, make a comment at this point, we'd welcome them to so do. If we indicate by raising your hands, not necessarily physically like bushmen like me do, but by electronically, then we'll get you to raise the question, make it. Meanwhile, okay. Chief Alarm Firm is being highlighted. Okay. Meanwhile, our panelists, if there are some key points you want to make about the general thrust of our conversation and the question that I have just raised, please ready it. If we take one or two questions, we'll come back to you to speak to those before we close. But I'm particularly interested in how we stimulate the people who, if you will, be key drivers of the expansion of the value chain, the banking sector, how we get industry to develop more skills, support this, how policy can help those bankers connect up to sources of capital around the world that exist, that can come in and facilitate financing those, if you will, new entrants into the business and ensure that, they don't get hamstrung by the nature of the way that we lend in Nigeria, which can be very limiting. So if there are no questions, there are, okay.
To
Obi.
say something.
Okay, Obi, yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Tommy.
Okay, Cass, just 1 second. We'll take a question, then we'll come back to you.
So thank you very much, Professor Tommy. It's been a very enlightening conversation so far. I'm out in New York at the moment. That's where I'm calling in from. I've had the opportunity of interacting with some of the gentlemen who are on this forum, but I'm particularly interested in Kola Karim's intervention, where he talked about the role of financing in this whole area. And I wanted to get his view in terms of what should be the role of the African multilateral or African Development Bank, so to speak. And what are they doing? How have you been able to interact with them? And what do you think they should be doing, in terms of supporting this whole industry? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Kola, you want to respond? Of course, Obi has spent most of his working life at the Afri-Exim Bank.
Thanks, Prof. I would answer that. I think that question, it goes in two parts. Let me tell you the problem. The global multilaterals, when we talk of the Africans, they're not, their source of capital is the international market. So they have to go with the dictates of international standards. So if you look at talking about oil and gas today, most of the international institutions are putting restrictions on funding oil projects. So Africa is not going to be a standalone. So we need to start thinking internally. So if he mentioned African Development Bank. African Development Bank has, as a multilateral institution, derives a source of capital from various, including the United States. And we know where the United States stands on decarbonization. That's one point. So when you go to African Development Bank for funding, and it's an oil project, you're going to meet it with a no or a prolonged answer that will put you off. But you have other African institutions like Afri-Exim Bank who are seriously making waves in supporting institutions like ourselves in raising capital to fund oil and gas projects on the continent, but they are too little and far between. So we are, and we need to, as nation states, oil producing countries in Africa, we need to go out looking for pockets of capital that will finance oil and gas developments to meeting the required targets that the nation states of this continent, more so like Nigeria, to get and create that energy independence. That's what I think for now, Prof.
Yeah, that's an important perspective. You know, I'd like to again point to this question of capital and where it is in the world today. The French economist Thomas Piketty is probably one of the biggest writers on the subject, and he makes the point of globalization and accumulation of capital. And so I think that this capital is accumulated in some hands. I mean, a couple of gentlemen in California probably own more capital than the entire continent of Africa. How to engage those kinds of places where capital is pooled and convincing them about what it does for the world in spite of global movements. I mean, we will not say, you know, carbon is dead, but everything is a transition. Of course, we just go into the flow and we're dead. So we may find particular holders of capital who may be less doctrinaire than others, and if our banking institutions can connect up with those ones, we may be able to get a good pipeline. And that's why organizations like Afri-Exim Bank are important, because they can play a catalyzing role in that. So there's plenty of work to be done there. Yeah, Casper, you're going to say something.
Yes, I wanted to greet our beloved Dr. Hetu here, who also is a very prominent driver for the Petroleum Club Lagos. So I salute the doctor. One of the youngest,
yes,
one of the youngest gentlemen around.
Perhaps we should let everybody know that the Petroleum Club celebrated Dr. Ihetu and Chivoibo as the youngest octogenarians of the club, yes, just last week here in Lagos.
Yes.
Sorry, Kaswe, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, I mean, quickly, just going back a bit, in terms of the engineering, the Nigerian engineer and professional are well known across Africa, across the Middle East, in all the institutions of the world. If you go to Aramco, if you go to ADNOC, if you go to if you go to Senegal, Angola, or South Africa. So Now, so individually, they are making waves. So, but what is remaining is to have Nigerian engineering companies that now go international themselves with the engineers. So as a business group. Okay, in other areas, Dangote has invested in so many other places. And then the banks are also going global. In between, you have our own trading companies or traders who are all over the place. But I think the organized engineering of construction, of infrastructure development, that one requires a bit of capital and, but that's where it should head ultimately, because we have the skills and the educational base to do that. Now, like if you go to US, to other rig or any of those things, you discover that the guys who are manufacturers, who are selling these things to you, really what they're doing is to consolidate, to assemble, to design, and they will order equipment from, other companies who, if you need, if you're talking about something like what they call blowout preventer, which is a big equipment, So there are foundries that make this stuff, and they have the paperwork on what they're making, the quality of the steel, the temperature, so there's a traceability documentation. But the guy who's the manufacturer that you're dealing with doesn't really manufacture. He assembles, he designs and assembles, and that's why they can design and go to China or any place where there's infrastructure for those things and you basically order the components, the pistons, the steel, the fabricated steel, forged steel, and put everything together. So what we don't have here are those kind of supporting systems,
Yeah, what can we do to build them up? What can we do? That was the whole idea of NETCO, wasn't that? In a manner of
speaking.
Okay,
so the NETCO, does the engineering, but like to actually, you need on the local content, for instance, countries like, few countries, if you want to do local content in a very, very advanced way, it must be backed with some kind of funding and long-term contracts, where you say, okay, I'll guarantee you work for 5 years, and this is the investment you have to make. You have to have your own facilities, and then the funding is available on those term basis, so that somebody can, because it takes 3 to 5 years, both in training your personnel and to get them to that level, So it has to be a strategic push. Okay, now, Simbi, as you're going to talk to him, they are trying, but like their capacity is still very limited, The kind of funding we're talking about is heavy funding. So if you need NETCO to be an assembler and manufacturer, there has to be supporting industries who can do real content, We have a lot of fabrication companies locally, but they also have limitations. But even at that, there's a lot to work with, But you have to have contract support. The regulator or the state's company has to partner with these guys. So everybody has to be working together as a unit, not like anybody is, So if somebody is on something, and you want to support another person, let the person do something different. Don't disrupt the supply chain or the service delivery chain by, basically having discretionary you know, so let somebody, if you have a gunfighter, support him, and then you can encourage somebody else in a parallel way, not to play around. So people lose their contracts for no reason, or things are disrupted, and you can't really do very much that way. So there has to be understanding that we are all in this together.
Can the Petroleum Club play a role in mentoring, getting players like all of you, for example, to take a number of others to mentor them into aspects of the value chain? And this is probably a question that Dr. Heitu can also maybe make a comment on. If the goal of the Petroleum Club is broadened to mentoring new entrants into the sector, would that be an appropriate role?
Dr. Yates, are you taking that? Okay. I think it's muted. Maybe it doesn't know.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Yates is muted.
Okay. I think I'm now unmuted. Yes. One of the objectives of the Petroleum Club is networking. Networking in a way that you're able to relate to your industry colleague, and that way you can then arrive at a position where those things, or that understanding that would not have existed if you were operating outside, would now be brought into play, and you're able to collaborate. Let me give you an example. When the marginal fields program of 2003 happened, as has been said before, many of these people have never run their own businesses. It's one thing to be an expert geologist working for Shell, retiring in Shell. It's another thing to operate a marginal field. It's a challenging, it's a challenge for an entrepreneur who has been a technocrat all their lives. So during that period, I have to mention names now. Somebody like Tunde Afolabi brought in a lot of his expertise, because at that time he was running Amni already. Brought a lot of his expertise to these new entrepreneurs that were now about to run marginal fields. And I can tell you that collaboration of sorts brought together a lot of people as we tried to form the Petroleum Club. So I don't know whether I've answered it in a good way, but I can say
I hear you.
Yes. And
I'm sure that we can do more going forward to expand entrepreneurship into the sector.
Yes. And by the way, at the last marginal field round, we were also asking ourselves in the Petroleum Club, is there any way people of like minds can get together and collaborate? And well, I can't give you an answer whether really that happened or not. But certainly, I mean, that is a forum where oil industry entrepreneurs meet, talk, understand themselves, not just in the field of operations, but in a more comely environment.
Okay. Well, thank you all so very much. Our time is up for today. We've got to go. I'd like to appreciate the contributions of our panelists and all of us who have tuned in today. I'm hoping that we will continue the conversation a fortnight from today. we probably will go to the downstream sector and then return with Simbi and his group to talk some more about Nigerian content in a subsequent episode, if you will, of this set of conversations. Our hope is that a lot of young people who are tuning in will learn more, and we will make more progress. Thank you all. Have a brilliant new week, and let's keep hoping that we can make this sector work for Nigeria. Thanks. I appreciate all of you.